Hayotzi Mikala Amar Khan, what comes out from everything we are discussing here, Sha'adam ha'omed mul al bechira hamitzar also. This is actually an incredible idea. That if a person finds himself opposite, Baal Bechira means another individual, another human being, someone else who is causing me pain, who is causing me difficulty. Kigo nahag sha'atzer oso shoter. For example, a driver whom a police officer pulled over. O Baal she'ishto o yoladav mitzarim also. Or a man who's having difficulty with his wife or with his children. O isha shabayla o yoladeh mitzarim also. Or a woman who's having difficulty with her children or her husband, or any situation like this. Alav lahachlit ba'ofen chad mashma'i b'fnei mihu omid. A person has to begin to think to himself and ask himself, before whom do I stand? At the end of the day, who is it that is causing me this challenge? Imu machlit shu omid b'fnei ha'amuna shezeh Hashem yisbarach v'lo lifnei yoladav v'lo lifnei ishto. So if a person realizes that the challenges that come about in life, although they may come about through a spouse, through children, through the police officer, through someone else, at the end of the day, those individuals are simply the staff in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my circumstances are a result of God Himself. Azai hu lo yachnif, lo yischanim, lo yaseh shum hishtadlos lahashpia al oso ba'al bechira la'aniach lo o lihishama lo. So this is a very dramatic statement. So the person realizes that everything at the end of the day is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that a person will not invest his effort into trying to change others. Instead, what one will invest his efforts into ultimately is changing himself, is recognizing that these circumstances are a result from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore by definition the question is, what do I take from them? How do I grow from them? How do I respond to them? So if you think about this is an incredible idea. When someone does something negative to me, and at the end of the day I am adversely impacted by someone else's actions. So what the Machaber is suggesting is the following. A person could simply look at the other as the source of their pain. And if I do that, then my goal is to try to change the other. So the truth is, most of us know, good luck with that, right? They're trying to change someone else. Doesn't usually happen. But at the end of the day, I could also look at my circumstances as a result, as a message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore recognize that the goal here is not to change the other. The goal is to try to figure out how to impact and change myself. He goes on, he says, the Chol Shekin, last line, page base, the Chol Shekin, lo yichas v'lo yivaz v'lo yikala also. And then of course it goes without saying that if I recognize that my circumstances are from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore again, each of my circumstances are designed to help me self-actualize, and therefore it's my job to try to go ahead and try to figure out how to become a better person as a result of my circumstances, how to change myself as a result of my circumstances. I don't spend my time getting angry or getting upset at the makel, at the staff that has stricken me. He goes on, he says, Ella yifna el mi, top of page Gimel, yifna el mi sheshkiach alav, vehevi alav es hanisayon hazeh. Rather again, myself, ultimately to the individual whose hashkacha is upon me, who has brought upon me this particular nisayon, to the one person who is capable, or one entity who is capable of helping me, habore. So we'll say, incredible yisod. How do you deal with adversity? Now, of course, the interesting part over here is it's easy to accept this approach when a person is dealing with what we'll call general life adversity. Person is stricken with illness, person is stricken with problems with prognosis, certain things that clearly emanate from God. Then I understand they're coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and my job ultimately is to try to figure out how to grow from them. The Mechaber is adding in over here that this is true even when I face interpersonal adversity, a recognition that I can't really change the other. So what I could do with these new circumstances is figure out how to grow from them, how to self-actualize them, how to transcend them, recognizing that these messages themselves are a message or something that is given to me from the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Page Pei Gimel. V'yesh bazeh madrego shonos. There are different levels here. Ki gam im kibel es ma shekori lo be'amuna v'diber im Hashem v'asa tshuva v'achar kach nisa b'chol zos lifnos al osa adam b'nisayon hashpia alav zeh gam zeh pegam be'amuna shelo b'hashgacha pratis. Well, it's like here the Mechaber makes a statement which I think is a little bit extreme, but it certainly helps to paint a picture. So the Mechaber says over here that if a person accepts everything upon himself, be'emunah, he accepts that everything is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore again he speaks with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, works it out with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, figures out how he's to grow from his circumstances. But with all of that, he tries to go ahead and change the other individual. So I think the Mechaber is taking an interesting picture here, where he says, and what he's saying over here is a person with perfect emunah. A person with perfect emunah recognizes that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything comes, including the way that our other person is acting towards me, is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, again, my job is not to spend my life trying to change other people. My job is to figure out how to ultimately change myself. That's my job. Therefore, if I cultivate my emunah, but still try to change the other, so the Mechaber suggests that that's a pegam, that's something lacking in my emunah. Le'achar shezemara shesof kol sof adayin nishra b'socha nekuda shebo shemi she'omed mulo hu metzius b'fnei atzmo. So at the end of the day, the reason for that, he says, is because if I approach life like that, it shows that I believe that the person opposite me, who's causing me these issues, is going ahead and ametzias bifnei atzma. Ultimately, again, he's an entity unto himself, meaning that what he's doing is outside of the purview of hashgacha. He goes on, he says, "V'hu eno yochai be'emunah ha'amidis." Such a person does not live with true emunah. Shakol b'nei adam hein biyad Hashem, u'tzrichim lifnos el Hashem levado v'lo l'shum adam. So we'll say, I think that ultimately a somewhat of a hybrid model is very possible as well, which is where a person recognizes that the events that occur to me are not a result of the actions of the other. So it's a very important yesod. The results that occur to me, obviously the other has his or her bechira. They have their bechira, and if somebody chooses to exercise their bechira in the wrong way, they could hurt me. But the shaila is, how do I deal with that adversity? What the Mechaber is suggesting is to recognize that which occurs to me in life occurs to me because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the plan that Hashem has for me, including when another mistreats me, when another hurts me, when another adversely impacts me. This is the Ratzon Hashem. This is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it is my job to figure out how to grow, how to learn from these circumstances. My job is not to figure out how to change the other, because again, as I mentioned before, as we all know in life, you can't change someone else. People only change when they themselves want to change, not when someone else is going to try to change them. So the Mechaber therefore says, any attempt to try to impact the other is a lack of emunah. So I think that maybe that's true for the highest level of emunah. I think that there are hybrid models whereby a person could go out and recognize that at the end of the day, all of my circumstances are from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even the person who causes me pain is simply the makel, simply the staff in the hands of the Ribono Shel Olam. And my essence ultimately, again, is to try to figure out how to grow, how to transcend, how to overcome these circumstances. That being said, there may be an additional element of trying to help the other understand the error in their ways. If they've hurt me, to help them at least understand what it is that they've done that is hurtful, what they've done that ultimately, again, has adversely impacted me. Should I spend my life trying to change them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But there may be a certain element of perhaps trying to enlighten them to understand the pain that they've caused the other. So let's go right there. So actually it's a very beautiful section as well. Gam kasher ha'adam sovel ekev te'uyos kishlonos ukiyotze bazeh devarim ha'tluim l'chora bebechira shel. So we'll say, if you notice again, we're going through the different types of life adversity. So he started first with what we'll call, for lack of a better term, natural adversity. Natural adversity is pain that's brought about clearly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, illness, right? Other things that really have nothing to do with another person, but clearly emanate from the divine. We then transition to the second category of life tsaras, which are tsaras that are caused by another. And again, our goal is to try to recognize that that's also caused by the divine. That's also caused by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the end of the day, that's also there choreographed by God. Now we come to the third category of life pain. The third category of life pain, Abosai, is pain that's caused because of bad decisions that I make. I can't blame another person. I can't blame the cosmic universe. I did this. I made these bad decisions. And as a result, again, I am in this particular circumstance. He goes on, he says, bless you. We'll say it's very important to understand. We all have a free choice. All have free choice. You know, I've often mentioned this. We live in a society that tries to go ahead and convince us that it's not our fault. It's not our fault. I have this, I have that, there's this circumstance. We'll say, unless a person is mamish, like, unfortunately, crazy. I say crazy, I don't mean like it. Make a show like a person lacks mental capacity. So a person is responsible for their actions. Right? At the end of the day, I make a choice in life. I make choices every day, I make choices every single moment. Yes, there may be duress, there may be other circumstances, but it's important to understand the buck of my life stops with me. And as such, again, I bear ultimate responsibility for what happens and what doesn't happen in my life. So therefore, if I make a mistake, step number one is own it. Own it. But I ever listen to this. I will say, but okay, so now I've owned it. Step one, I own it. Now, again, I recognize now it's post mistake. We'll say this is incredible. And here we get into a very delicate dance. On one hand, I have bechira, I have free choice. And therefore, the choices I make, I have to take responsibility for them. Yet, amazingly enough, what's the picture we've been painting? The picture we've been painting is everything is part of Hashgachas Hashem. Everything is part of the panorama of divine providence, which I will say then yields a very, very interesting reality, which is what? That even the mistakes that I make are part of what? Are part of Hashgachas Hashem. Now listen, I want to be clear. I don't want to select. I could choose now. Obviously, being part of Hashgachas Hashem divine providence does not in any way take away my ability to choose freely. In other words, if I make a mistake, I got myself into this mess. But just understand, this mess is part of Hashgachas Hashem also. This mess is part of the divine plan as well. And therefore, I have to understand that this mistake, and by extension, this mess I've gotten myself into, is part of the messer, is part of the message, is part of the plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. Therefore, what? V'lachein ein lirdof es atzmo. Therefore, Abosai, don't beat yourself up. V'lipa lahashamos atzmios alachalishas hadas. Therefore, Abosai, what's so important in life is after I make a mistake, which inevitably we all do, don't spend your time beating yourself up. At the end of the day, when I make my mistake, so again, recognize that even though my bad decisions have landed me where I am, this mistake is still part of Hashgachas Hashem, still part of divine providence, and therefore, again, there's something to be learned. There's something to be gained. There's some level of self-transcendence that I have to try to accomplish in this difficult moment. So again, the problem is, of course, when people hear the phrase Hashgachas Hashem, they often understand that to mean that frees me from Hashgacha, meaning it wasn't me, it was God. No, it was me. I made the bad decision. I made the wrong turn in life. But at the end of the day, this is where I am. Therefore, this is part of the divine plan. And now the shaila is, what do I do with these particular circumstances? So we'll stop over here. We'll pick up the Yiras Hashem in the middle of this section of Pei Gimel tomorrow. No, Gamzulta we're going to get to. That's the next section here, Sasha.
So if somebody's harming you, or whatever, there's this line between your Hishtadlus and just accepting. So what's with the Hishtadlus?
So again, I think that's what the Machaber is saying is your Hishtadlus has to be vis-a-vis yourself. So you save yourself from pain, you distance yourself from pain. Obviously, don't have to subject yourself to it, saying that it's hashgacha pratis. But at the end of the day, don't spend your energies trying to change the other, because that's not going to happen, and that's missing the point. The point of this adversity is to grow. So if you spend your time trying to change the other, you're missing the boat on the opportunity here. That being said, the Hishtadlus channels itself is, how do I change my circumstances? How do I change my life? How do I get out of this negative cycle? And sometimes, how do I distance myself from this individual?
This means just turning inward and saying,
correct? Michael, if you think about it, most times in life, where you try to change someone or try to change a circumstance externally, very rarely does it get you anywhere. Most times in life, when we're successful, we turn inward. That's the great reality of existence.
you gotta try and get the person to stop.
There's a difference between when somebody's actively causing you pain, getting them to stop that pain, versus trying to change that individual. Correct? The person has to put the ishtadlus in stemming the negativity. But also, there's a point in time where I'm not going to change this person. So what do I do with this circumstance? And then the Mechaber says, you turn inward.
You just see that pain is hashgacha, so why stop it?
Because it's the same reason why a person is stricken with illness. So pain is hashgacha also. You don't say don't go to the doctor. In other words, you do what you could do to ameliorate and to lessen your pain. But at a certain point in time, when a person realizes I have to turn inward now, it's not about shaping these external circumstances. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line. And knowing where that line is not always easy. All right. All right, Shabbos, good morning. Today's daf is Kuf Lamed 135. We are picking up on Kuf Lamed Dalid Amud Beis 134b, and we're picking up at Ibay Lahu, which is 2, 4, 6, 8 lines up from the bottom. Say Ibay Lahu. So the Gemara asks. So also remember again, what we were discussing yesterday is a husband's ability to say Girashti es ishti. I have gone ahead and I have divorced my wife. And if a man makes that statement, at the end of the day, is he believed or not? So what we left off with yesterday, I will say, was the following: that a husband is believed lahabah. Husband is believed going forward, but a husband is not believed limafreya. He's not believed ultimately again to make that statement or to make that statement chal in a retroactive fashion. So ask the Gemara, Amar limafreya ma'al behemunin lahabah. What happens if the husband made this statement retroactively? In other words, he says, I divorced my wife a month ago. So obviously that we're not going to believe him. And the reason we don't believe him, I will say, is because, as we said before, Lemaisa, divorce has a kol, right? Divorce has a certain publicity to it. And if there's no publicity, then I don't believe that it happened. So I don't believe him in the past. The shaila is, can I believe him going forward or not? Mi palginan dibura, o lo palginan dibura. As I will say, essentially the question is, can we splice his lashon? Could we say, listen, you said you divorced your wife in the past, that I don't believe you, but I do believe you regarding that statement going forward. So Rav Mari Rav Zvid, Chad Amar Palginon, V'Chad Amar Lo Palginon. So Mari and Rav Zvid have machlokas. One says you could splice his words, one says you can't slice the words. So Ma'ishna Midirava, so we'll say, why is this different than what we learned earlier? The Amar Rava, Ish Ploni Bal Ishti. So let's listen to this case. Let's say Ruvain testifies that his wife committed adultery with another man. And we'll say, now the halacha is that a husband can't be made on his wife. Right? He can't testify about his wife. Why? Because you can't testify about anyone who's related to you. So a husband can't testify. So listen to this case. Reuven testifies about the Boel. Right? So Reuven testifies about the adulterer. And he, together with another man, say that we saw this man commit adultery with this woman. So what's the halacha? Huva acher mitzarfen lahargo. So both Reuven, the husband, as well as another man, can combine to go ahead and form a testimonial unit to put the Boel, to ultimately put the adulterer to death. So the Gemara says lahargo v'lo laharga. They could form a testimonial unit to go ahead and execute the adulterer, but not the wife. Why? Because again, as we said before, the husband would be pasal le'idus to testify about his wife. So I'll say, so what do you see over here? Even though the husband is testifying about an act of adultery that includes his wife, what we do is palginan dibure. We split apart, we splice the testimony, and we essentially again accept his testimony vis-a-vis the boel, the adulterer, but not vis-a-vis his wife. So here you see palginan dibure that we do splice, we do split apart testimony. If that's the case, then when the husband says, I divorced my wife a month ago, even though we don't believe him going back, we should be able to believe him going forward. To which the Gemara says, betray gufe palginan b'chad gufe lo palginan. To which the Gemara says, the cases aren't really the same. In the case of the adultery case, so there are literally two people. So meaning we could split apart his eidos and say, we'll believe you vis-a-vis the adulterer, but not believe you vis-a-vis your wife. In this case over here, Abosai, by the case of I divorced my wife, Kirashtes Ishti a month ago, so Lamaisa again, there's only one entity. So perhaps when we say Palginan Dibur that you could splice apart the testimony, that's only when the testimony is about two different things. I could apply it to A, but not apply it to B. When the testimony is on one entity, you can't splice it apart. So as I type of Kof Lamed Hey, Halu Davish Kashachit. So there was a man who was dying. Amarle, it's a Seilaman. So they asked him, who will your wife be permitted to when you go ahead and you die? And we'll say that was another way of asking, is your wife going to be subject to Yibum upon your death? That's the way that Rashbam understands that. Will she be subject to Yibum, or at the end of the day, will she be permitted to marry whoever she wants immediately upon your death? So what does the husband say? Amar lo, the husband responds, Chazil lekan Rabba. She could even marry a Kohen Gadol. And we'll say, obviously she can't marry a Kohen Gadol, because even if she's a widow, she can't marry a Kohen Gadol. The point that the husband was making was what? Is that there's no Yibum. When I die, she will be permitted to marry anyone, quote unquote, who she wants, because again, because there's no Yibum. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, here's what the Gemara is suggesting. The Gemara says like this. Amar Rava. Rava says, "My nechoshla." So Rava says, what should we mean? Is there anything that we should be concerned about in this case? So the husband's statement essentially is that at the end of the day, she is muteres l'chol adam. She's going to be permitted to anyone upon my death, and there is no yibum. So Rava says, even though the husband made this statement, is there anything that we have to be choshesh for? So the Gemara says, "My nechoshla." Hamrav Chiyavar Abba Amrav Yochanan Baal Shamar Girashti Esishti Ne'eman. So the Gemara says, Rava then responds and he says, listen, Reb Chia says that if a husband says, I divorced my wife, he is believed. Which Rava say is another way of saying, now why is a husband believed when he says, I divorced my wife? Because we assume that since he has that power in his control to divorce his wife, if he says it, he's believed. Why? Because there's a migo. What's the migo? The migo is that if he wanted to divorce his wife right now, that ultimately he's believed. So both say, what Rav is saying over here is, I could apply that same migo in this case. When the man says, my wife is permitted to marry anyone she wants, right, upon my death, so we believe him. Why? Because he has a migo. What's the migo? The migo is he could divorce her right now. And by divorcing her right now, he frees her from any potential what? Any potential post-death yibum complications. So because he has that ability, therefore we should believe him as well. So if you look at Rashi for just a moment, so Hashbam, nami haki kamar, girashti esishti, v'chazdia la'alma, umiyo l'kahana asira, da'alo patrina la ela betainas girashti esishti, ugrusha psula l'koin, shara inu nefteres betainas yishli banim, da'muchsak la b'givya de'in la banim. So also listen to this. So the Gemara therefore suggests, when a man goes ahead and says that my wife is permitted to everyone, obviously he throws in the Kohen there as a little bit of hyperbole. But the point is, the reason he's believing Abosai is because he has the migo. The migo is that he could say, I divorced her. And since the husband always has that power, therefore he is believed to say that upon my death, she'll be permitted to any man. So the Gemara says, Abai responds, V'hakias Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef Amram Yochanan, Baal Shamar Girashtes Ishti Eino Ne'eman. But Abai says, 1 second. This idea that a husband is believed to say, I divorced my wife, is a machlokes. In other words, not everybody agrees with this particular concept. So if that's the case, again, how can you automatically accept it as a halacha? Amrlei v'lav mi. Excuse me. It says Amrlei v'lav mi lo shanin hukan limafreya v'kan lahaba. But a second, did we not explain that? No. In fact, everyone agrees that you could say girashti es hishti. Everyone agrees that lamaisi a husband is believed to say, "I divorced my wife." What's the distinction? He's not believed limafreya. He's not believed ultimately again to make it retroactive, but he is believed to say mikana lahaba from this point going forward. So the Gemara says, should we rely on that answer and literally establish halacha like that? Suppose listen to this. Rava said to Rav Nosson bar Ami, I think in this case you have to suspect. Chushla means you should be vigilant. Now, vigilant of what? Well, so take a look at the Rashbam. Chushla, so it's almost like right across in the Rashbam, about 8 lines down. Chushla ka'abaye v'ti asra l'shok. So I will say, interestingly enough, comes along Rava, and he says to Rav Nosson, I think in this case you should be careful and not allow this woman to go ahead and remarry without first conducting a bit more investigation. Now, what investigation? Mishum da amar lahel lemay nichosh kamar hacha devada ika lemechash umehacha shaminan debal shama grashis tishti hionem. So we'll say this is actually a very interesting statement. So Rava says to Rav Nosson bar Ami, I think in this case chushla means just do a bit more investigation before you go ahead and you allow her to remarry. Now, what exactly the nature of this investigation is, we're going to see in just a moment. So the Gemara goes right. The Gemara tells a story. Hahu dava muchsak lan deleste achi. So there was a man who had a chazaka that he had no brothers. That was the chazaka. He had no brothers. And what happened? V'amar b'shas misa deleste achi. Suppose say he had a chazaka that he had no brothers. And at the time that he died, he said he had no brothers. Okay? So we'll say, so this seems to be a pretty open and shut case. In other words, what's the ramifications of not having brothers? This must be a case as well where what? There were no children. And therefore what he's saying is, my wife is not subject to you. What happens? Amar Rav Yosef, my lechushlam. So Rav Yosef says, is there anything that we have to be concerned about in a case like this? So we'll say, my lechushlam means, even though he had a chazaka, there's no brothers, on his deathbed he said there are no brothers, is there anything that we have to be choshesh for? So the Gemara says, my choshesh lach, my lechush lachat at the muchsak lan deleste achin. So number one, the man has a chazaka that he had no brothers. Va'od ha'amar b'shas misa deleste. Furthermore, I will say, he went ahead and he confirmed that chazaka when? On his deathbed, when he said that he has no brothers. So this would appear to be a situation that you don't have to really be concerned for anything. We just take it, meaning the chazaka as well as his deathbed words seem to confirm the same reality, namely that what? He has no brothers. So the Gemara says, Amrle Abaye, ha'amri, I'm sorry, va'od, ha'mishas v'safar, Amrle Abaye, ha'amri di'ika edim b'medina sayam, diyade di'esle achi. Oh, so must listen to this. And here we get into a fascinating dynamic. So Abaye says, well, there are people who say, right? There are people who say that there are witnesses overseas who could confirm that, in fact, the guy who died did have brothers. So now apparently there's some type of rumor that's getting started that there are witnesses overseas who could confirm. I want to be clear. Not that the brothers are overseas, but there are witnesses overseas who know about the existence of brothers to this man. I will say, obviously, if this man has brothers, then what? Then his wife is subject to evil. So the person says, 1 second. Hashta miyaha lesnu. Come on. We can't. If we start worrying about that, then ein l'davar sof. Meaning, at the end of the day, right now, those witnesses are not here. Rashi says over here, what does it mean the witnesses aren't here? Umashani hashta miyas halesnu ve'ein lanu ela mashe inenu ros. Well, so this is a very important issue in general. In general, in the adjudication of halacha, there's a general principle of ein ladayin ladun ela mashe inu ros. The judge can only adjudicate, or the judge can only decide based on what he sees. So meaning Lamaisa, at the end of the day, you only have the ability to be. So the Gemara says, Sabai says over here, that's nice that people are saying that there are witnesses overseas, but they're not here. They're not here. And at some point in time, when we adjudicate the case, we have to adjudicate based on what we know to be true. So the Gemara says, Lav Hanud Rabbi Chanina. Is this not the case of Rabbi Chanina? Dar Rabbi Chanina. Eidim B'tzad Istan V'te Aser. If there are witnesses literally in the east, should that prohibit them here? And I was saying, now understand what this is talking about. Take a look at the Rashbam. Lav Hainu, you see that Rashbam? Lav Hainu, he says, the Makshinam Biksuvis, Parakaisha Shenis Armala, Gabi Banse de Marshmo. So we'll say it's the sixth wide line in the Rashbam. The sixth wide line. So we'll say, we actually, if you remember this case from the Suvis, the daughters of Shmuel were taken captive. So we'll say, under normal circumstances, what we often say is that a woman is violated by her captors. So the Gemara says, the Ishtabion, Va'askinu la'ar di Yisrael. So we'll say, so what happens? So Shmuel's daughters were taken captive, but then afterwards they were brought to Eretz Yisrael. Now we'll say, now in Eretz Yisrael, no one knew about their captivity. No one knew about it. So what did they say? Va'amru, nishbesi utahorani. So we'll say, so the girls said, we were taken captive, but what? We were never violated. Visharinu Rabbi Chanina lihinasi lakohanim. Rabbi Chanina permitted them to marry kohanim. We'll say, now why? What's the logic there? So that, if you remember again, this was the sugya of Pesha Aser, who are Pesha Hitir. We'll say, no one knew about their captivity. So therefore, they could have done what? They could have kept their mouth shut about the captivity. No one would have ever known the difference. Since they are the ones that therefore shared the information, they're also believed to qualify the information, because if they were lying about being violated, then what? They could have just said nothing. So therefore, Rabbi Chanina permitted them to even marry Kohanim. So Gemara says, so we'll say, so then when they were about to get married, people came along and said, but we heard there are witnesses overseas who could testify about the fact that the girls were violated. So Gemara said, what happened? Rabbi Chanina said, just because there are witnesses in the north, so we'll say, so Chanina said in that case, listen, don't tell me there are witnesses somewhere in the north. Meaning, if there are witnesses, then bring them here now. If they're not here now, or if you can't identify for me who exactly these witnesses are, then I'm not taking it into account. So we'll say, so same thing over here. If he has a chazaka that he had no brothers, and on his deathbed he said he has no brothers, then what happens? Then what does that tell us? He has no brothers. So the fact that you're going to tell me that there are witnesses somewhere overseas that attest that he has no brothers, I'm not worrying about overseas witnesses. If they're here now, great. If they're not, I'm not taking them into account. To which the Gemara says, Amalei Abai, but Abai says, well, the cases may not be comparable. So the Gemara says, we have many different leniencies when it comes to a woman who is taken captive, right? So just because we have those leniencies by a woman who is taken captive, who says that we will go ahead and apply those same leniencies by an Eishes Ish, by a marriage? Rashbam points out over here that by a shvuya, for example, we believe in Eid Echad that she wasn't violated. That has to do with the fact also that we believe that a woman potentially could avoid being violated by constantly making herself unattractive. So the Gemara says that there is a certain control she has over these circumstances, and therefore that allow her, or that allow us to go ahead and believe her with a lesser credit, with a lesser threshold of edus. But who says that we apply that lesser threshold ultimately again to a married woman? So we'll say, how does the sugya end? Rava says to Rav Nasan Barami, the truth is chushla. Chushla, Rashi says, ka'abaye belo tinase belo chalitza. So we'll say it's actually very dramatic. So the Gemara is suggesting over here that at the end of the day, Abai would say, or Rava said to Rav Nasan, the truth is, in this case where people are saying that there are witnesses overseas, you have to take that into account. In other words, you can't just allow her to remarry without anything. So the Rashbam says she needs chalitza. And once again, obviously needing chalitza means that's what? You need to go through the process, figure out ultimately again if there is testimony overseas, who these people are, if there is a brother, and actually go through the process of vetting. So just tell you something interesting. So the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins over here, the following idea. Shulchan Aruch Paskins, okay, so actually just in this case of Gerashti Ishti, so because this is important yesod, because remember this whole conversation got started with, is a husband believed to say I divorced my wife or not? So the Gemara says, Habal Shamar Gerashti Ishti. Now understand, this is a case, well, Habal Shamar Gerashti, the man says I divorced my wife, Eno Naaman, he is not believed. They will say, obviously, this is talking about a case where no one's able to produce a get, right? So a husband says, I divorced my wife, he is not believed. The choshesh and the dvar of Batiyah something megureshes, fine. Even if she agrees with him and says, my husband divorced me, in the absence of a document or the absence ultimately again of edim, they are not believed. Now, why is that? So the Shmuel comments on this, and the Shmuel says, even though again there's a migo, and the migo is that the husband has the ability to divorce her right now if he wants. Miko makom eno ne'aman, the chalamegarish yeshlo kol. What's that? Divorce has a kol, which makes sense. The people know about divorce. So because people know about divorce, I will say, if no one knows about this divorce, no one's ever heard that this couple is divorced, that kind of raises our antenna a little bit and says something doesn't make sense over here. And therefore, again, ultimately, again, even if husband and wife agree with each other, Lamais at the end of the day, they are not believed. So I will say, that is the halacha ultimately, again, of Abal Shamar Gerashti Ishti. Now, this case, I will say, the way the Gemara ends off over here, of chushla is a bit more complicated. We're not going to delve into this sugya now, but suffice it to say, this gets into the more complicated discussion about when you go ahead and you take the rumor mill into account and when you don't. In other words, when you get into a situation where Lamaisa again you say that somebody says there are witnesses overseas, when do you go ahead and take that into account? When do you not take that into account? So again, you see over here, at least in two of these cases, that it is taken into account. A little bit more of an involved sugya. We'll actually see it primarily in Masechah Sanhedrin. So we'll have to remember.
You're a good though, because if you can't produce the brother.
So the question is, at what point in time is the threshold for investigation satisfied? And we say we now close. Meaning, chushla just means Rashbam says chushla means she needs chalitza, but chushla b'pashtus means you have to investigate the claim. So the shaila is now, how far do you have to go to investigate the claim of potential existing brothers? That we'll see in Meretz Hashem and Sanhedrin. Says the Gemara, Ze'achi Eno Ne'aman. So it's like the last case in the Mishnah was the following. The last case in the Mishnah was, let's say you have three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven says, by the way, we have another brother, right? Yitzchak. We have another brother. So we'll say, so what happens? Reuven says we have another brother, but now the way the Mishnah reads it, we'll say is that the other brothers do not seem to accept the existence of this newfound brother. And therefore, again, so what did the Mishnah say? So the Mishnah says that if the father dies, Reuven has to share his share with Yitzchak, the newfound brother, but the other brothers are not obligated to share their portions with the newfound brother because Lamais, again, they don't accept him as a brother. So says the Gemara, Ze'achi no ne'aman, v'idach mai. So in this case over here, what's happening? So remember, Reuven's telling Shimon and Levi, Mazel Tov, we have another brother. His name is Yitzchak. Okay, so that's the Gemara. Fine. What are Shimon and Levi saying to this new revelation? So if Shimon and Levi are agreeing that Yitzchak is their brother, so why doesn't Yitzchak get to share in the rest of the Yerusha? So the Gemara says, Ella de Ka'amri Lavachinuhu. Rather, I must see that Shimon and Levi are saying that what? Yitzchak is not our brother. But 1 second, he must take a look at the end of the Mishnah. Naflu lo nechasam imakom acher, yershu achav imo. So we'll say again, what does it say? What does it say at the end of the Mishnah? That if what happens, if Yitzchak, I will say, inherits property from somewhere else, right? Let's say Yitzchak inherits, or he purchases property, and then Yitzchak dies, and there are no heirs. All of the brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, get to share in that property. But if they're denying their brotherkeit, right, their brotherhood with Yitzchak, then why should they get to share in that? Oh, supposed to listen to this. What's the case in the Mishnah? The case of the Mishnah will say is where Reuven comes along and says to his brother Shimon and Levi, Mazel tov, we have a new brother Yitzchak. And what are Shimon and Levi saying? Shimon and Levi saying, we just don't know. I mean, okay, I guess that's nice. Always wanted a fourth brother, but we just don't know whether or not that claim is actually true. So Rashi says, Rashbam says over here, therefore what? Take a look at Rasham. Dika Amri Einon de Yodin, Hilchach lo shakel minay omidi, Da'amina le isi raya. Ukishemei sen yarshin also mikach achein achai, Shemo delan shos asafik achein. So therefore in this case over here, where the father dies, the other brother, Shimon and Levi, say, listen, we don't know if this guy Yitzchak is our brother or not. Bring a raya that he's our brother, we'll split Yerusha. Up until that point in time, we're not giving the point of our Yerusha. But when Yitzchak dies, so remember again, Reuven is the one who's claiming that he is the brother of all of them, and therefore, again, by definition, he is makna to them a part in Yitzchak's Yerusha. Amar Ravas, what do we see from here? Zos Ameres, Mana Libi Adecha, V'Hala Omer Ein Yodea Pater. So I'll say, what do we see from here? You see from here that Lamaisa, if somebody comes over to me and someone says, Silver, you owe me $1,000, or right, there's $1,000 of money in your hand, and I say, listen, I just don't know. I owe a lot of people money, right? So I don't know. I may owe you money. I may not owe you money. I'm not sure. So I'll say, I'm not denying the claim. I'm just saying I don't know. Then what do you see from here? You see from here that I am pater. In other words, we'll say that when someone comes against me with a definitive claim, but I say I just don't know, so meaning we'll say this is not such a chiddush. This is hamotzi mechaver alav haraya. Meaning saying I don't know is not the same thing as what? As saying I agree. It's saying I don't know. And therefore the burden of proof is upon the extractor to go ahead and prove that in fact they don't know. In other words, we'll say the Rashbam points out that this is actually a machlokes. If you look at the Rashbam, he says over here, Zos Omeres, Oploti Bekam Makamos Begimara, Drafuna Yehuda Amri Chayiv, Radnachon Rabbi Yochanan Amri Potter, the Kamalan de Potter, Dilchasek Rabbi Yochanan, Mechavero, Ukrab Nachum Medine, Ela Shiish Bashwas, Hasashen Yodem, Asisanami, Ha'acha Echa Toim Bishvilo, Achiv HaSafik, Mamon Yesh La'achiv Yadchem, Vein Omrim Ein Anu Yodim. Supposed to say that's this case. This case over here is Yitzchak, Reuven is saying, you owe Yitzchak a part of Yerusha, and the brothers are saying, we don't know. So I'll say, you see from here that when someone claims against you in a definitive fashion, and you say you don't know, you are putter from having to pay. So Abai says, the Olam, we'll say, on base, the Olam Emunach HaChayiv. We'll say, it could very well be that in the case where someone comes over to me and says, Silver, you owe me $1,000. And I say, I don't know. It could be that I'm chayiv. They will say, why? Why am I chayiv? I'm chayiv because Rashbam points out, bari v'shema bari adif. Right? They will say, if somebody's making a definitive claim and someone's making a possible claim, the definitive claim always trumps the shaky claim. And therefore, I will say it could be that someone comes over to me and says, well, say, now obviously, whenever somebody comes over to you and says that you owe them $1,000, you need a bit more proof than just making a statement like that. But Lamaisa, what it does mean is if somebody's coming with a definitive claim and someone's just saying, I don't know, maybe the one with the definitive claim does win. So why is this case different? Because I will say this could be comparable to the following case. If someone comes over to me and says, Silver, you owe Reuven $1,000, and I say, I don't know. So I will say in that case, everyone agrees that I'm not chayiv. Right? Because again, if somebody's lodging the complaint or the claim on behalf of someone else, and I say, I don't know, of course I'm not chayiv. So we'll say that's more comparable to the case of our Mishnah. In the case of our Mishnah, what's happening is Reuven, the brother, is coming over to Shimon and Levi, his other brothers, and what is he saying? You owe Yitzchak, our newfound brother, part of the Yerusha. And what are the brothers saying? The brothers are saying, we don't know. So we'll say in a case like that, everyone will agree that the brothers will not be chayiv to share the Yerusha, but if Yitzchak, the newfound brothers, die, then in fact the brothers will all share in the Yerusha. So listen to this. Remember this case. This case over here is, so what's happened? Reuven says to Shimon and Levi, we have a new brother Yitzchak. Shimon and Levi say, we don't know. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Then what happens? Reuven, Shimon and Levi's father dies. So as a result, Reuven gets his portion, Shimon and Levi get their portion. Reuven is obligated to split his portion with Yitzchak because Reuven is claiming that Yitzchak is a brother. Now what happens? Yitzchak dies. and Yitzchak dies without heirs. So we'll say the part of the Yerusha that Yitzchak got from Reuven goes back to Reuven. Goes back to Reuven. I was supposed to say, meaning we don't say that now that goes back into the general inheritance pot and all of the brothers go ahead and divide it up. Rather, again, the portion of the Yerusha that Reuven gave to Yitzchak goes back to Reuven upon Yitzchak's death. So says the Gemara, Bai Rava, Shevach sheshavchu nechasim me'alehem mahu. So it says, listen to this. What happens in the following situation? So when the father died, Reuven took part of his Yerusha and he gave it to Yitzchak. Then what happens? Let's say the Yerusha appreciates, the property appreciates. Then Yitzchak dies. So I will say, what happens to the amount of the appreciation? Does the appreciation go back to Reuven as well? Or do we say that perhaps the principal amount that Yitzchak got goes back to Reuven, but the appreciation goes into the general, what we'll call, estate pot, and is therefore divided up amongst the brothers. So the Gemara says, so I'll say when it comes to what we call Shevach HaMagia L'Ksefayim, which means what? Look at the Rashbam. Shenasan Zeh L'Safek Karkar Ekonis, V'tarach Ba Zeh HaSafek Lachrosh V'Lizroa, V'harihi Ata Kishechozeres Lo, Nos L'Nose, Melea Peros, Loti Ba'ilacha, Davadei Kulu Cholkim V'hai Shevach. Techinafel L'Chas, listen to this. So if Yitzchak worked to improve the land, in other words, he put in effort to improve the land, so I will say everyone will agree that appreciation is evenly split amongst the brothers. That appreciation ultimately goes back into the estate pot. So Reuven will get back the amount of principal, so to speak, that he gave to Yitzchak, but any type of improvement actually made by Yitzchak himself will go back ultimately into the general estate inheritance pot. Kiti Ba'ilacha. Where does the issue come up? So we'll say the means appreciation that occurs naturally. Kigon, dikla va'alim. Let's say again Yitzchak was given a palm tree, and the palm tree just got larger. Or Ari was given land, va'ask sirtom, and the water brought sediment onto the tree. So we'll say, so what happens in that case? So we'll say in that case again where the appreciation just occurs by itself. So does that go back to Yitzchak, or ultimately again does that go ahead and go back into the general inheritance pot? So we'll say, so that's a teku. That the Gemara leaves unanswered. So we'll say the part the Gemara answers is if the appreciation occurs because of work that Yitzchak did on that. So we'll say, so all the brothers get to share in that equally. That's not Reuven's any more than anyone else's. If, however, the appreciation occurs by itself, then the Gemara says that's a teku. Says the Mishnah, Mishemes. They didn't say Daitiki Kshayrecha. So this is an interesting case over here. So remember, we have been dealing with a Shchiv Meirah in our cases. So the Shchiv Meirah cases, I will say, so what happens in the Shchiv Meirah, ultimately, right, we'll define that tiki in just a moment. Fine. So here's the case. In the Shchiv Meirah case, we normally assume that if somebody is on his deathbed, he has the ability to convey property just through verbal declaration. All he needs to do is verbally assign it, and it's as if it's written, it's as if it's sealed. Here's the interesting case. Someone dies, and you find literally, Kshura al Yerecho means tied to his leg. What you mean is you find on his person, in a way that's clearly indicative of the fact that he wrote the document, is shtar. And I will say a daitiki. Rashi says, what's daitiki? Shtar tzavas shchiv meirah. So we'll say you literally find the document, the last will and testament, on his person. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? Harezu eno klum. Ultimately, again, this doesn't mean anything. This document means nothing. I will say, now we're going to define exactly what this means, eno klum. So take a look at the Rashba for just a moment. Harezu eno klum. Shafilu in hechzik achar misa. That will say, even if at the end of the day, also shenichtava lo hamatana lo kani dafagav the tzava shchimira kona la achar misa hani milikedesh lo titrov daito alav avakoach ashtar lo odev kitzava. So sure lo gomer like no sell because so listen to this. This is a case we're going to see where the shchimira made no verbal declaration. So what's happening? you find the shtar on his person after his death, the person named in the shtar cannot collect after the death of the shchid mira. Why, Rabbi say? Why? Very simple reason. Because shtar can't work after death. You can't, I'm sorry? But it wasn't conveyed until after death. The way that shtar works is it's the conveyance of that shtar that affects acquisition. So therefore a shtar cannot affect acquisition after the death of the individual. Again, we're going to get into this in the Gemara. However, Zika Bala Acher, Beimin Yershim, Beimin Shin Yershim. I will say, what happens if the Shchiv Meira went ahead and conveyed this shtar to someone else during his lifetime, whether that person is an inheritor or that person is not an inheritor, then what's the halacha? Dvarav kayaman. Then ultimately the words of the Shchiv Meira stand. And I will say, what does this mean? Take a look at the Rashba. Sola Acher, Mechayim. Afa Pishlo Nechtav L'Shem Osaish. Elakach Amalo Nechosam Aksum B'Shtar Zani Makne L'cha. Bekabalas Ashtar Shetakabal Mimeni. Harez Zekana Delgar Mitzavas Pip. So also listen to this. We're going to see something very interesting. If the Shchiv Meira Bosai, now this is going to be a very convoluted case. Let's say in the shtar it's written that the Shchiv Meira is giving his property to Ruvain. But it turns out that while the Shchiv Meira is alive, he says to Shimon, listen, all of the property written in the shtar, I am hereby conveying to you. Right? And here's the shtar. So we'll say that works to convey the property to Shimon. Even though what? It's not Shimon written in the shtar, it's Ruvain. So we'll say the mechanics of that in Eretz Hashem we'll see in the Gemara. Says Rabban, so we'll say, what's the point? The first part of the Mishnah will say is the following. That if a Shchiv Meira said nothing on his deathbed, but after he dies, you find the shtar tied to his leg. You will say, why does it bring down tied to his leg? It's tied to his leg because we're not choshesh over here that someone planted a shtar on him after his death. We assume this is the shtar that he himself wrote. So we'll say, in that shtar it says that he's conveying property to Ruvain. That shtar doesn't work. Why? Because we'll say again, a Shchiv Meira has the ability to convey property to someone else while he's alive. But once he's dead, he doesn't have the ability to convey property to someone else through a shtar. Ezuhu daitiki. So says the Gemara, what's a daitiki? Kol shekasav ba do tehela mekem b'liyos. That hereby, that again in the shtar it's written, this property should be given to so and so. The ezuhi matana. So what's the difference between that and a matana shtar? Kol shekasav bo mehayomu la'achar misa. I will say a shtar is a document in which is written, I hereby give over this property from today and after my death. So the Gemara says, Ella, mehayomu la'achar misahu da'avi matana. Me'achshav lo havi matana. But I will say, is that to say, from today and after death, it is a matana. But from now, ultimately, mehayomu la'achar misahu da'avi matana. Me'achshav lo havi matana. So I'll say, so what we're saying over here is that lamaisa, again, are you telling me that it's only after the death it should be a matana? But from today it's not a matana. Amar Abaye hachi kamar izu matana bari. We'll say, what's the definition of a matana? Shehi kamatna shchiv meira telokani el achar misa. So I'll say, what's the definition ultimately again of a gift of what we'll call a matnas bari, a regular person's gift that resembles the matana of a shchiv meira. Or as we'll say, what does it mean that it resembles the matana of a shchiv meira? That the full extent of the gift should not take effect until after the death of the grantor. Kol shekasav bo mehayomu la'achar misa. So we'll say, here's what's interesting. What the Gemara is suggesting over here is the following: is that lamaisa again of gifts. There are gifts in which you convey full ownership now, and there are other types of gifts, I will say, where you convey title now, or I should say, right, you convey title now, but payros after death. In other words, that I'm conveying ultimately again to you the rights of ownership, but full ownership only vests after death. That would be like a matnas shchiv meira, I will say. So that would be a matnas bari, that's like a matnas shchiv meira. We're going to define this in greater depth. Yosef Rabba Barafuna Bachsadra, the Beirav. So we'll say Rabba Barafuna was sitting in the gazebo of Beirav. Yosef Vikar Meshayid Rabbi Yochanan. Shchiv meira, Shamar Kisvu Utnu Mara Laploni Nemes. We'll say Shchiv meira, who writes, go ahead, write down and give a mana to Ploni. So we'll say, so what he's saying over here is Kisvu Utnu, write a document and convey a mana to Ploni, Umes. And what happens? And then the Shchimera died. So what's the halacha? Ein kosvin v'nosnin. So we'll say we do not go ahead and write the shtar and give the gift. Why? Shamalo gamar laknosa al b'shtar. Because maybe the Shchimera only wanted to convey ownership of the money through shtar. Ve'in shtar la'achar misa. So we'll say, so what's happening over here? You see, a Shchimera has the ability to convey property to another just simply through what? Right? Through speech. When the Shchimera says, Kisvu utinu, write a shtar. So we'll say, if we get a chance to write that shtar before he dies, and write it and convey it, Shalom Yisrael, that's wonderful. The keys over here is what's happening. Shchimera gave these instructions, but we didn't have a chance to write the shtar before he died. So what are we concerned about? What we're concerned about is maybe he only wanted the conveyance of the money through a shtar. And Abba say, here's the chap, you can't write a shtar after a person has died. So therefore, in that kind of case, we would not be able to convey the gift. Amar li Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Elazar said, is daruba. We'll say, is daruba means be very careful and vigilant with this halacha, because this indeed is the correct halacha. So we'll say, I just want to point out, in this version, you have debate. You have Rabbi Bar Hafuna saying this in the Achskadra debate. Rav saying the statement of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Elazar saying, be vigilant with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Now watch this. Rav Shizvi says no. He says it's the same halacha but different attributions. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Asili Gemara says Amar Rabbi Elazar. Amar Rabbi Elazar is one who said this halacha. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan is daruba. And Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said, I will say first wide line, be very vigilant with this halacha. So the Gemara just says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Kavase Rav Shizvi mistabra. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak liked the version of Rav Shizvi more. Why? I Amrit Rabbi Shlama Rabbi Elazar Amra. I Amrit Bishlama Rabbi Elazar Amra. Because if you want to say that Rabbi Elazar was the one who said it, it's Tzrich Rabbi Yochanan L'Sodi Alad Rabbi Elazar. So would it be necessary for Rabbi Yochanan to go ahead and testify about that which Rabbi Elazar said? Eli Amrit Rabbi Yochanan Amra. So what that means is Rabbi Elazar. If you say that Rabbi Elazar said it, then ultimately again Rabbi Yochanan, who is the Talmud of Rabbi Elazar, would be bolstering the statement of his Rebbe. That makes sense. Eli Amrit Rabbi Yochanan Amra. But if you said it was Rabbi Yochanan who said it, it's Tzirich Rabbi Elazar L'Saudi Aleid Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. Ultimately, again, would it be necessary for Rabbi Elazar? I'm sorry, I just said that the reverse of Elazar. I'm sorry. Would it be necessary for Rabbi Elazar to go out and testify about the words of his Rebbe? That if at the end of the day the Talmud said it, then it makes sense for the Rebbe to bolster the words of the Talmud. If, however, again the Rebbe said it, does the Talmud need to go ahead and bolster the words of the Rebbe? Furthermore, we'll just do one more line. Vo Tashma to Rabbi Elazar Amra, the Shalach Rabbin Mishpeit Rabbi Avo. The Rabbi said in the name of Rabbi Avo, Haviyodim Sheshalach Rabbi Elazar Lagola Mishum Rabbeinu. That Rabbi Elazar sent to the general dance in the name of Rabbeinu. Shchiv Meira Shamer Ksovu Utnu Mana Laploni Umeis. That the Shchiv Meira gave the following instruction, and he said, what? Write down and give a money to Ploni. And he died. And when did he die? Before it was the ability to write down and to convey the gift. Aim kosvin v'nosnin. We do not give the gift. Why? Shema lo gamar lahaknosa ela b'shtar ve'ein shtar la'achar misa. And ultimately, again, because maybe he only wanted to go in and convey it with shtar. And lamais at the end of the day, you can't go ahead and write a shtar. So we'll say, so therefore, again, we'll stop over here for today. We're not finished, but what we're leaving off is a little bit mitzugya. What's mitzugya? We'll say, so here's what we know. A shchivnira, I see it. The typical shchivnira, or the power of the shchivnira, is the ability to go ahead and convey property just through amira, just through a statement. The problem, of course, becomes when the shchivnira begins saying, kisvu utinu, I want you to write it down, to commit it to writing. We'll say, that's when we begin to get nervous. What are we getting nervous about? Why is the Shechina telling us to go ahead and write it down? I will say, we're going to see Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to start tomorrow with Rabbi Yochanan, but the way the Gemara is ending off is by essentially saying that if the Shechina wants it in writing, what he's saying is the only way he wants the property conveyed is through what? Is through a shtar. That's fine as long as the Shechina is still alive. Once the Shechina is dead, you can't, I will say, orchestrate a shtar achar misa, which then means that the Malchut Shchiv Meirah becomes undeliverable. We'll begin in Eretz Hashem tomorrow with the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan will agree, and he will say, no, under certain circumstances, the ability to give the gift still exists. Stop up there.